The first time I saw the bulldozer rolling toward Karen's prized SUV, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee and a camera already rolling. She was still in her robe, scream running down the driveway like a reality show contestant who just realized the prize money went to the wrong team. The dozer didn't pause. It didn't hesitate. It didn't even glance at her, as if machines have some sixth sense for ignoring Karens in full shriek mode. And I didn't stop it either. Because this time, she earned every second of it. It all started 3 months earlier, when Karen, full name Karen Delancey Butterfield Rhodes, self-appointed HOA royalty, decided that my gate offended her sense of neighborhood aesthetic. My gate, mind you, sat on my rural property, half a mile off the main road, with no HOA jurisdiction in sight. But that didn't stop her from repeatedly dragging her fake little clipboard over to my drive, pretending to do compliance checks, like she was some sort of backwoods building inspector. And every time she didn't like what she saw, which, shockingly, was every time, she'd retaliate by parking her oversized SUV squarely in front of my gate, blocking it, for hours, sometimes overnight. At first, I chalked it up to boredom and delusion. Karen had that distinct flavor of upper-middle-class vanity that turns minor inconveniences into personal crusade. Her house, which she bragged was once on the cover of a local landscaping newsletter, sat just outside the boundary of my property, close enough to make her feel involved, but far enough that her complaints held zero legal weight. That tiny detail didn't stop her from writing a 10-page manifesto to the county claiming my gate was aggressive and unsuitable for the community character. The county sent a polite reply telling her to take a hike. So she did the next best thing, she blocked the gate again. That time, it cost me a calf. One of my younger heifers got tangled up in some fencing during a storm, and I couldn't get the trailer through to get her to the vet in time. She didn't make it. Karen shrugged. Maybe if you had a more welcoming gate, people wouldn't feel the need to challenge it, she said with the sort of detached smirk only someone who's never had to clean blood out of straw could deliver. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't yell. I just nodded and took a picture of her license plate. That was when I decided it was time for escalation. Quietly, legally, and with the precision of someone who'd been raised by a man who once sued a golf course for slicing their sprinkler runoff onto our cornfield. I filed an obstruction complaint with the county. I got a court order that allowed emergency removal of any vehicle blocking access to agricultural land. And I made one last attempt at peace. I walked over to her door and offered a compromise. Move the SUV. Stay off my land. Stop blocking my gate. In exchange, I'd let her pretend she won. She could write a smug little Facebook post about how she set boundaries with her unhinged neighbor, and we'd never speak again. I thought it was generous. She slammed the door in my face. The next morning, her SUV was back. Centered. Bold. Like a middle finger on wheels. And this time, she'd chained the tires together. With padlocks. So I made one call. Not to a tow truck. Not to the sheriff. I called Clive. Clive owns the local demolition company. We went to high school together, and more importantly, I'd helped him out when his zoning permits got tied up in red tape last winter. He owed me a favor. I asked him what it would cost to nudge an SUV that was trespassing on a legally documented access road. Clive laughed. You want it nudged or flattened? I want it educated, I said. So 2 days later, right around 9 a.m., Karen's yoga hour, a bright yellow bulldozer rolled down my drive. I had cameras running from 3 angles. Karen didn't notice until it was halfway to the gate, and by then, she was halfway into a full-blown performance art piece of screeching and flailing. She yelled that I was destroying private property. I calmly held up the court order. She screamed that I was endangering her vehicle. I pointed out that the chained tires counted as willful obstruction. Then she screamed something incoherent about you people and respecting authority, which was rich considering she had none. The dozer didn't flinch. It scooped under the rear bumper, lifted gently, and deposited the entire SUV into the adjacent drainage ditch. No damage to my fence. No contact with anything other than grass and pride. Karen collapsed to her knees like she was witnessing the fall of Rome. The SUV was fine, by the way. Scratched, sure. Dented, maybe. But the only thing truly crushed was Karen's ego. She called the cops. They showed up, read the order, and told her she was lucky I hadn't pressed charges for obstruction. She tried crying. Didn't work. Then she tried screaming again. Also didn't work. Finally, she tried bargaining, offering to mediate the situation like adults. I just said, "You blocked my gate one too many times. Now you've met the consequences." She stormed off, swearing revenge. I believe the exact phrase was, "You haven't heard the last of this." Which, coming from someone who once tried to get a speed bump installed on a dirt road, sounded less like a threat and more like a promise of future comedy. But I didn't relax, because Karen was many things: delusional, arrogant, allergic to humility, but she was also persistent. And I had a feeling this little bulldozer ballet wasn't the grand finale. It was only the overture. I figured Karen would stew for a bit, maybe post a few passive-aggressive rants in her HOA newsletter about neighbors who think they're above community standards. What I didn't expect was a formal letter from a fake law firm arriving at my mailbox 3 days later. It was printed on cheap, off-white paper that smelled like toner and desperation. The header read Butterfield Roads Legal Consulting, which already screamed vanity project. Inside was a cease and desist, demanding I refrain from operating industrial machinery for the purpose of intimidation. My bulldozer apparently constituted a threat to the emotional safety and vehicular property of Ms. Delancey, Butterfield Roads. I read it while eating a chicken sandwich and laughed so hard I nearly choked on a pickle. The return address led me to a P.O. box in town, and a quick online search revealed no such firm registered in the county, state, or even the nearest 3 zip code. But I knew what this was. It was a bluff. A clumsy, inflated, ego-driven bluff. Karen had decided to cosplay as a lawyer, which would have been hilarious if she hadn't taken it one step further. The very next day, a new sign appeared in front of her driveway: Official HOA Compliance Vehicle. Authorized to patrol and enforce. Right under that, in tiny font, was something about Section 3 of the Neighborhood Beautification Accord. The word neighborhood was even spelled the British way, because of course it was. She had officially declared herself a code enforcement officer. In her mind, I was now her jurisdiction. But I didn't react. That's what she wanted. Instead, I did 2 things. First, I contacted the real HOA president, a guy named Donnie who lived on the far end of the neighborhood and treated the position like it was a punishment for missing jury duty. I asked him, very calmly, if Karen had recently been promoted to any position that allowed her to patrol other people's property. He laughed so hard I could hear his wife in the background asking if he needed his inhaler. No, he wheezed. No one gave her anything. She nominated herself as aesthetic coordinator last year and we ignored it. Are you telling me she's still running with that? I was. Second, I filed a complaint with the county sheriff. Just in case this went somewhere darker. Blocking a gate was one thing. Impersonating legal authorities was another. The deputy took my statement, made a face, and said, "We've had 3 other complaints from folks she's tried to fine for violations. One guy said she threatened to revoke his lawnmower." He paused. "Which, I'm not even sure is a thing." "I'd keep an eye on her," I said. Then I waited. For about a week, nothing happened. Karen disappeared from her driveway patrols. No more SUV at my gate. No more clipboard strolls or barking at birds to stop perching on mailboxes. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone in her life had staged an intervention. Maybe one of her yoga classmates had pulled her aside during Downward Dog and whispered, "Karen, honey, you're not law enforcement." But no. She was merely regrouping. I discovered that the hard way the following Friday, when I returned home from the feed store to find my gate completely missing. Not broken. Not knocked over. Gone. As in, unscrewed from the hinges and removed clean off the post. I stopped the truck, got out, and just stared for a full minute. No tire tracks. No evidence of brute force. Just two lonely posts standing there like confused fence sentinels wondering where their buddy had gone. Then I spotted it. Karen had dragged my gate across the property line and propped it up against her garage. Like a trophy. Like she'd just won the Best Petty Vandalism award and was waiting for applause. I walked over, camera in hand, and started filming. She came out of the house wearing a bright pink blouse with the word, "Empowered," stitched across the front in rhinestones. That blouse should be admitted into the Smithsonian as proof of modern delusion. "Return my gate," I said plainly. "No," she snapped, folding her arms like a spoiled child who had just hidden someone's crayons. "It violates our community sidelines." "There's no community here, Karen. This is private land. Your house is 300 feet that way, and your HOA ends 2 lots before mine." She gestured dramatically at the open space where the gate used to be. "Exactly. It's an eyesore. And you left it unsecured. That's an open invitation under Civil Nuisance Code." "Which code?" She blinked. "The municipal one. Which doesn't apply here." "I'm within my rights to abate hazards," she insisted. "Karen, this isn't a hazard. It's a gate. A legal, registered, privately installed gate." "Well, now it's a conversation piece," she said. That was the moment I realized she thought she'd won. That by removing the gate, she'd somehow re-established her fake dominion. That I'd back down, put up a white picket fence, maybe plant some petunias, and agree to let her supervise the architectural feng shui of my property like it was a suburban museum exhibit. Instead, I called the sheriff. Deputy Harlow showed up 20 minutes later, and took one look at the gate leaning against Karen's garage like lawn decor and sighed audibly. He turned to her and said, "Ma'am, you can't just remove people's gates." "It was unsightly," she insisted. "That's not how property law works. I was acting as a compliance officer." "You're not a compliance officer," he said slowly, like he was explaining gravity to someone who thought it was optional. "You're a civilian. This is theft." Karen's expression flickered. "Temporary confiscation." "Nope. That's still theft." "Then I demand he be cited for environmental hostility." I opened my mouth, closed it, chose to let her bury herself. The deputy turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I considered it. I really did. But then I remembered the face Karen made when the bulldozer moved her car, the mix of shock, fury, and existential confusion, and realized that this wasn't about justice. This was about escalation. I didn't want her arrested. I wanted her to stew, to sweat, to wait for the next hit and never know when it was coming. "Not yet," I said. "But I'd like this documented. Just in case." Karen scoffed. "Typical. Hiding behind paperwork." I looked at her and said, "No. I'm hiding behind patience. You should try it." The deputy had her return the gate. He even helped me reattach it. As we finished, he muttered, "I've seen people go to war over fence lines, but this is something else. What does she want?" "Control," I said. "And she's not used to being told no." He nodded. "Well, she's about to find out what no feels like in triplicate." That night, I installed motion sensors on the gate. A friend of mine who works in electronics helped me rig up a silent alert system. If anything crossed the gate line again, I'd know. And I wouldn't call the cops next time. I'd call the county road crew. Because here's the thing. Karen had filed so many bogus complaints about overgrown access routes that the county had finally approved a maintenance grant for rural easements, which meant they were required, legally and on the record, to clear my gate's approach road with full-size machinery. If she blocked it again, she'd be looking down the blade of a public bulldozer, backed by taxpayer dollars. And this time, I wouldn't be filming for laugh. I'd be filming for court. It took exactly 8 days for Karen to make her next move. 8 days of eerie quiet, no SUV in sight, no glittery shirts, no surprise, compliance sweeps. The silence made me more suspicious than her shouting ever had. I'd seen raccoons go still like that before they leapt for your face. Karen was no different, except raccoons have better manners. I was up early that morning, walking the perimeter with my dog, Roscoe, when I spotted a line of neon orange surveyor flags zigzagging across my southern fence line. At first, I thought the county road crew had started their easement prep early. But these flags weren't county standard. They were the kind you buy in bulk online, no GPS markings, no company stamp. Just bright little lies fluttering in the wind. Someone had staked them in a perfect curve, through my pasture, past my irrigation rig, and directly across the middle of my access road. And guess whose backyard that line just barely curved into? I didn't even need to knock. Karen was already standing on her deck, arms folded like she was posing for the cover of Dictators Monthly. She called out before I could say a word. "You're trespassing on disputed land now," she said with a tight, satisfied smile. "I've hired a private surveyor." I stared at her, expressionless. "You staked my property with dollar store flags and now you think that rewrites the county plat?" "No, he did," she replied, stepping aside dramatically to reveal a guy in khakis and a too-tight polo shirt pacing around with a clipboard and a measuring wheel like a toddler pretending to be an engineer. "This is Rick. He's certified." I waved. "Rick, did you check the county assessor's GIS records before you let Karen pay you to flag land she doesn't own?" Rick hesitated. Well, this is a preliminary site marking. Not a legal boundary assessment." "So it's a coloring book," I said. Karen's jaw tightened. "It's enough to trigger a temporary injunction while we investigate." "Who's we?" "The Neighborhood Advisory Council." "That's not a real thing." She didn't blink. "I'm forming it next week." This was escalation, all right. Karen had skipped from SUV tantrums to pseudo-legal land grabs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just turned and walked back to my house. She called after me, something about adverse possession and how she was reclaiming improperly managed frontage. I let her talk. She always wanted the last word. I wanted the last laugh. Inside, I went straight to my file cabinet, because while Karen was inventing committees, I had something she'd never heard of: documentation. I'd inherited this land from my grandfather, and with it came nearly a century's worth of survey maps, title transfers, fence agreements, and even water rights, bundled together like the 10 Commandments of boundary law. I scanned the relevant documents, highlighted the GPS coordinates, and called the county clerk. By noon, I had a certified copy of the official parcel map. By 2 p.m., I'd emailed it to every county enforcement officer and left a message with the Agricultural Zoning Board. And by 5 p.m., I had a formal statement from the county attorney confirming the flags had no legal standing and recommending they be removed before any action resulting in property damage or livestock endangerment occurred. I printed out a copy and taped it to her mailbox. The next day, the flags were gone. But Karen wasn't done. If she couldn't beat me with SUV blockades or imaginary council meetings, she'd take a different route: noise. That Saturday, just before sunrise, I was jolted awake by the sound of power tools. Not the buzz of a distant saw, but the high-pitched wail of a concrete cutter, loud, aggressive, and far too close. I threw on boots and headed out, and sure enough, Karen had hired a landscaping crew. They were cutting into the gravel easement that ran along our property line, one that, per our zoning agreement, had to remain clear for utility access. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked the guy operating the saw. He stopped, lifted his goggles, and shouted, "Trenching for border lighting. Got a permit right here." I snatched the permit from his hand. It was for decorative edging on her land. Not mine. Not the easement. And not the shared boundary she was now butchering with a masonry saw. Karen emerged like a queen inspecting her garden gnomes. "We're enhancing the curb appeal," she said. "Don't worry. It'll raise your property value too. You're cutting into a public easement. It's called beautification." "It's called illegal excavation," I said. "And unless you want a visit from Public Works, you'll fill it back in and get off my line." She didn't back down. Not until 2 county trucks showed up that afternoon and measured the trench for themselves. The foreman, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, told Karen flat out that tampering with an easement could result in a $10,000 fine. Karen insisted it was aesthetic innovation. Carla said she didn't care if it was performance art, it was coming out. The crew filled in the trench. Karen sulked behind her hedges. I made lemonade. That evening, I caught her outside on her porch, talking loudly on the phone. Probably to her sister or one of her HOA lackeys, plotting the next debacle. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But she didn't know when to quit. And people like Karen, people who believe power comes from pretending to have it, can't handle being ignored. They don't rage when you fight back. They rage when you outlast them. So I turned the screws. I submitted a formal complaint to the county about unauthorized earthworks and attempted boundary manipulation. That triggered an inspection. I reached out to the Agricultural Board and informed them of her trenching near irrigation lines, which prompted another inspection, this time with soil integrity tests. I even contacted her landscaping crew's parent company and politely asked if they were aware one of their subcontractors was operating on public land without full authorization. Turns out they weren't. By Monday, Karen was buried in paperwork. By Tuesday, 3 different county departments had shown up on her lawn. I didn't gloat. I didn't even speak to her. I just watched from my porch as her empire of delusion started cracking. And that's when the final twist landed. A certified letter, this one real, arrived from the County Road Department. It was an official notice that, due to her numerous complaints about degraded rural access, they were deploying heavy equipment to grade and widen the access route along my property, starting the following week. Which meant bulldozers, excavators, graders, a parade of machines that would be rolling straight past my gate. And if anything blocked that route, it was coming down. Karen had finally complained herself into her worst nightmare. And all I had to do was wait. She didn't know it yet. But the same agency she had weaponized with phony complaints was now coming through in full force. And this time, I wasn't going to stop them. The first bulldozer arrived on a crisp Monday morning, driven by a guy named Bert who looked like he could bench press a tractor and then write a poem about it. His county badge was clipped to his vest, and he gave me a polite nod as he rolled down the access route, chewing a toothpick like it owed him money. Behind him came a grader, then a dump truck full of gravel, and finally a water tanker to keep the dust down. It was the kind of convoy you'd expect for a highway project, not a sleepy rural road between 2 stubborn neighbors. But the County Road Department wasn't playing around. Karen had filed 16 complaints in 3 months, every one of them a variation of, "This road is unsuitable for dignified passage." Now the county was fixing it. With extreme prejudice. I sat on my porch with Roscoe at my feet and a thermos of coffee, watching the show like it was a 4th of July parade. Karen, however, was pacing. She stood in her driveway in full panic mode, holding her phone like a sword she didn't know how to use. Her SUV was parked right at the edge of the easement again, whether out of stupidity or stubbornness, I didn't know. But Bert didn't even slow down. He waved at her, smiled, and gestured for her to move the vehicle. She shouted something about private property and eminent domain abuse. Bert shrugged. Then he kept driving. The blade of his dozer missed the SUV by about 3 inches. Dirt flew. The ground trembled. Karen screamed. But the machine didn't stop. It plowed straight past her driveway, carving a perfect, legal, county-mandated route just feet from her prized hydrangeas. By noon, the easement looked like it had been scrubbed clean by military engineers. Smooth gravel, new culverts, trimmed shoulders. Professional, legal, permanent. and terrifying to a woman whose entire sense of self-worth was built on imaginary control. That night, the county left a portable light tower parked near the site, illuminating the entire length of the road. Karen called the sheriff claiming it was light pollution and a violation of rural tranquility. The sheriff asked if she wanted him to cite the county. She hung up. The next morning, she tried to stall the second phase by parking her SUV halfway in the easement again. This time she chained it to a tree. I don't know where she got all these chains, but at this point I assumed her garage looked like a dungeon-themed Home Depot. Bert just radioed the supervisor, who radioed county enforcement, and 30 minutes later, a tow crew with a forklift attachment rolled in. They unchained the SUV like it was made of paper, then moved it to the far side of her lawn, gently but deliberately carving 2 perfect ruts in her manicured grass. Karen wailed. She said she'd sue. The county officer calmly handed her a brochure on how to file a small claims action. Meanwhile, I stayed out of it. I didn't need to say a word. Every tantrum she threw only made the county more eager to finish their work. Bureaucrats might not like conflict, but they hate inefficiency even more. And Karen was the human embodiment of inefficiency. That afternoon, as the final layer of gravel was being laid, Karen did the unthinkable. She marched into the path of the bulldozer. Now, to her credit, she didn't actually throw herself in front of the blade or try to climb it. But she stood there, arms out like she was trying to flag down an airplane, screaming about zoning overreach and constitutional rights. Bert stopped the machine, leaned out of the cab, and in the calmest voice imaginable, said, "Ma'am, you've got exactly 30 seconds before I call the sheriff and file a formal obstruction complaint. And just so you know, I always win." Karen blinked. Then she did that thing entitled people do when their brain short-circuits from not being taken seriously. She reached for a new identity. "I'm media," she said. "I'm documenting this for a community rights blog." Bert raised an eyebrow. "You mean the Facebook page where you posted a meme about tractors being tools of oppression?" She faltered. "That was satire." "Cool. So is your legal authority. Now please step aside." To everyone's surprise, she did. Slowly. Defiantly. But she moved. By sunset, the easement was finished. It stretched a full 18 feet wide, freshly graveled, with proper drainage and county signage. They even installed a reflective marker at my gate to designate it as an agricultural access point. It was beautiful, efficient, and, most importantly, impossible to block without inviting legal consequences. Karen retreated inside. No shouting. No declarations. Just a long, silent storming off like a Shakespearean villain who'd run out of monologues. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. Because Karen wasn't just beaten. She was humiliated. And some people, when cornered, don't surrender. They dig deeper. That night, around midnight, Roscoe started barking. I slipped on boots and stepped onto the porch, flashlight in hand. At first, I didn't see anything. But then I heard it, a weird, scraping metallic noise near the gate. I crept closer, moving slowly, and there she was. Karen. With a can of spray paint in one hand and a pair of bolt cutters in the other. She had already tagged the new county marker with the word illegal in red and was halfway through trying to snip the padlock off the gate latch. She didn't see me until I was 5 feet away. "You're trespassing," I said. She jumped. Not far, just enough to twist awkwardly and drop the bolt cutters. "I'm reclaiming stolen community space," she hissed. "That's county equipment," I said. "You just defaced government property. It was unauthorized." "No," I said. "You were unauthorized. This gate's been here for 50 years. The only thing new is your tantrum." Her eyes flickered, calculating. "You can't prove I did anything." I turned my flashlight slightly to reveal the small wildlife camera mounted in the tree above us. The red light blinked once, then twice. "It's motion activated," I said. "You've been recorded since the second you stepped off your lawn." She looked up at the camera, then back at me. I'll tell them you staged it, she spat. You're holding spray paint. She dropped the can. This is harassment. This is your last warning, I said. Leave. Now. Or next time, I won't be the one calling the sheriff. It'll be the county. And they don't play nice after midnight. For once, she didn't argue. She backed away, face red, muttering something about injustice and lawsuits and sabotage. But she left. The next morning, I filed a formal report with the county. I attached the footage. They thanked me, opened a case, and told me they'd be forwarding it to the state property board. Apparently, Karen had not only violated local ordinances, she'd potentially breached state-level infrastructure laws by tampering with rural access improvements. 3 days later, a plain white car pulled into her driveway. 2 men in suits got out. Not cops. Not county workers. Investigators. I watched from my porch as Karen answered the door and promptly collapsed into her usual flood of self-pitying drama. But this time, no one looked impressed. That evening, I received a call from Deputy Harlow. They're pursuing formal charges, he said. Might not be much, but it's enough to stick. Vandalism. Interference with infrastructure. Attempted destruction of public property. 3 weeks after her midnight vandalism attempt, Karen had gone uncharacteristically quiet. No more SUVs blocking anything. No more fake survey flags. No more trench digging or bogus cease and desist letters. Her lawn started growing wild at the edges, and her once perfectly curated hydrangea beds browned under the July sun like even her plants had given up on her. You could practically feel the entropy radiating from her house. And still I waited. Because I knew people like Karen didn't stop. They recalculated. I didn't have to wait long. On a humid Tuesday morning, I got a call from a man who introduced himself as an HOI-aligned investigator. The kind of guy who talked in passive-aggressive riddles and sounded like his tie was tighter than his skin. He said there had been recent concerns about my property, concerns of non-compliant usage, unauthorized structural encroachments, and unsanctioned machinery activity. I asked him what laws he believed I'd broken. He paused, then said, "That's what we're working to determine." I thanked him for the call and hung up mid-sentence. 10 minutes later, I saw Karen standing at the edge of her yard, staring at my house with binoculars. That was it. The final straw wasn't legal. It wasn't procedural. It wasn't even about land or gates or gravel roads. It was psychological. Karen had turned her obsession into a lifestyle. And like any overambitious tyrant, she didn't know when to retreat. So I gave her something to fixate on. The following Friday, I rented a bulldozer. Not a county one. Not borrowed from Clive. This one was all mine for the weekend, bright yellow and loud enough to be heard 3 counties away. I had it delivered right to the edge of the new access route, parked neatly by the fence with a ribbon tied around the exhaust stack like it was a birthday present to myself. Karen saw it within 20 minutes. She came storming over, red in the face, fists clenched, screaming about weaponizing heavy equipment. I stayed calm. I was always calm. That's what bothered her most. "What is that thing doing here?" she yelled. "Waiting," I said. "For what?" "For you to make another mistake." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "Are you threatening me?" "Nope. I'm preparing. You've spent months trying to control what doesn't belong to you. I figured I'd save everyone some time and bring in the equipment that'll clean up the mess when you do it again." "You're insane." "No, Karen. I'm patient. You're the one who keeps testing boundaries like they're optional. So now I'm just making sure the consequences are ready in advance." That was all I said. Then I turned around and walked away. I left the bulldozer parked there all weekend, unmoved, untouched, but undeniably present. It was bait. And she knew it. On Saturday night, she had the gall to call in a noise complaint. The sheriff's deputy arrived, took one look at the powered-down, perfectly silent bulldozer, and chuckled. "It's not even running," he said. "It's just sitting there." "It's intimidating," she hissed. "So's your attitude, ma'am." But last I checked, being annoying isn't a crime. Karen filed a formal complaint with the county HOA committee, even though mine wasn't an HOA property. She accused me of staging psychological warfare via industrial intimidation. The letter was so absurd, it got forwarded around the county office and became a running joke. One of the clerks emailed me and said it had been pinned to their bulletin board under the heading Drama Queen of the Month. Still, I waited, because I knew something bigger was brewing. Sure enough, it came on Monday morning. I woke up to the sound of shouting. Not Karen's this time, strangers. I stepped out onto the porch and saw a group of men in high-vis vests and polo shirts with generic compliance enforcement logos standing in my yard, pointing at things. One of them was measuring the distance from my barn to the gravel road. Another was taking photos of my solar panels. Karen stood off to the side like a general watching her troops sweep enemy territory. I approached calmly. "Can I help you?" One of them stepped forward. "We've been retained to perform a pre-compliance audit under the authority of the Butterfield Roads Community Standards Advisory Board." I raised an eyebrow. "The what?" "It's a newly formed local committee." "Let me stop you right there," I said. "This is private agricultural land. Zoned and recorded. Not under any HOA. Not under any advisory board. Not subject to your pretend authority." The guy hesitated. "We were told this was contested jurisdiction." "Then you were lied to." Another man chimed in. "Sir, we're just doing our job. If there's been a mistake, we can file a redirection." "There's no mistake," I said. "There's just a woman who can't handle being irrelevant." Karen shouted, "I told you he'd be hostile. Document everything." I pulled out my phone and started filming. "You're trespassing. You have 30 seconds to leave my property or I will exercise my right to remove unauthorized personnel using available means." Karen scoffed. "You wouldn't dare." I turned the camera toward the bulldozer. "Want to test that?" The men looked at each other. One muttered, "We're not paid enough for this," and started walking back to their truck. The rest followed. Karen tried to stop them, shrieking about unfinished inspections and non-conforming structures, but they climbed in and drove off. I walked to the edge of my property where she stood fuming. "You've embarrassed yourself," I said. "You've wasted your own money. You've harassed county officials, forged documents, and staged fake inspections. And now you've run out of moves. You think this is over?" she snapped. "You think this is a win?" "No," I said. "I think it's a warning." She laughed bitterly. "To who?" "To everyone who thinks fake power makes them untouchable." And then, like fate had a sense of drama, a county vehicle pulled up. Out stepped a man in a blazer with a clipboard and a badge from the State Property Oversight Committee. "Ms. Butterfield Rhodes?" he called out. Karen turned. "Yes. I'm here to discuss several pending investigations involving your interference with county infrastructure, falsified zoning reports, and unauthorized compliance activities." She went pale. This is a misunderstanding. I have copies of your documentation," he said, holding up a folder, "including one claiming to be from a state land beautification tribunal, which doesn't exist." That was satirical. He didn't laugh. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." I watched her freeze. No screaming. No excuses. Just that long, brittle silence of someone who finally hit the brick wall they swore they'd bulldoze through. She glanced at me one last time. Her face didn't twist in rage or arrogance. It just cracked. The investigator guided her to the vehicle. They drove off. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Later that afternoon, the county sent an officer to install a permanent post at the gate, officially marking it with a steel plaque. "Protected Agricultural Access, County Jurisdiction." I poured a glass of iced tea, sat on the porch, and admired the new addition. The sun was dipping low, the gravel sparkled, and Roscoe lay curled at my feet, snoring.